Hi, my name's Tim Watson. I'm a senior architect at Oxford Computer Group, and today, today's presentation will discuss the different scenarios involving misconfigured hybrid identity setups that could lead to compromise to Microsoft Entra ID. We're going to concentrate on Entra ID, but most of these scenarios could relate to other hybrid identity setups. We'll look at some common sense and better practices. Best practices may not always be good for your environment and give you 100% coverage, but you can look at some of these scenarios in this presentation and create better practices for your organization. So the agenda today, we'll review hybrid identity systems. One of the big themes is going to be blind spots, finding those blind spots in your hybrid identity systems. Some of those blind spots are complex environments. Hybrid is very complex. Sync service accounts, you never know where they are, and federated identity systems. And then we'll do some final thoughts at the end there. So a little bit about OCG, if you ever attended one of our webinars. We are an identity-driven security company, many years of deploying identity, thousands of projects. Again, new this year, we're a 2023 finalist for a Zero Trust Champion that was given by Microsoft, the MISA group. And some of the services we do provide, planning and assessment, deployment services, managed services, training courses. I think a lot of people that have attended these webinars have gone to our training courses. We also have customers that come to these webinars. So, we do a lot of identity and lifecycle management, security planning. We've done lots of pilots for companies. So these are the services we've provided over the years. So for our presentation, in a hybrid environment, identity management typically involves multiple systems, such as on-premise Active Directory and cloud-based identity providers like Entra ID, or it could be AWS or Google. Those could also have hybrid identity systems. This complexity can make maintaining a unified view of your identities and access rights across the organization more difficult. It can also create opportunities for attackers to exploit weaknesses in one system to gain access to another. Again, a common theme of if you can compromise something on-prem, you can exploit your Entra ID environment. If we look at this model here, it's not too complex. It's kind of what we started with probably going back 10 years now with having your on-premise AD, your Azure AD Connect server going up to your Azure AD. Now, obviously, it's called Entra ID, but this environment, that's not too complex, but over the years, it's got more and more complex. So we're going to look at a common theme that I mentioned, blind spots. What are your blind spots? These are what we're going to look at: complex identity systems, legacy systems, sync service accounts, and federated identity services. So what is a blind spot? A medical term for a blind spot could be a permanent or temporary area of depressed or absent vision. You can say that could be a partner IDP that you don't control. That's a blind spot. How do we know if they are, managing their servers correctly? An emotion, something a person is unaware of, or something they've chosen to ignore, which can manifest itself as destructive. That can relate to a system you could probably, manage better, but you think it may not, cause an issue. And even in driving, you have blind spots. We learn about them when we first start driving. It's an area around your vehicle that you cannot observe through the use of, mirrors or cameras nowadays without turning your head and therefore taking your eye off the road. You can relate that to not setting up proper monitoring and logging for your hybrid identity setups. So all of these, a hybrid identity system can, have an administrative blind spot within organizations, as they are architecturally complicated with many moving pieces, which often lends itself to operational oversight. Securing these hybrid identity systems is complex, especially legacy solutions, and a single misconfiguration can lead to a significant compromise of your organization's entire identity plane. So as you can see, there can easily be a blind spot in this configuration. Organizations can have multiple identity providers, third-party MFA providers, custom systems designed for onboarding and offboarding, and other interconnected systems. We've got our IDPs up here. If Microsoft Entra ID is configured to offload MFA to a third-party MFA provider, and that MFA is misconfigured, Entra ID will still trust that telemetry and configuration of that service. So you are depending on them. So that could be a blind spot. In IoT, you might not think it's going to do much. You might ignore it, but it could, present a problem. And then you can see that this diagram still has ADFS. One of the things we will recommend that has been coming out of Microsoft for a good time now is that you should move your ADFS authentication up to Microsoft Entra ID. It's going to give you better monitoring and logging. So it's something that, if you don't keep your eyes on the road without logging, it could help you much better. All right, so we mentioned these are complex identity systems. This is an exaggeration, this drawing here. But I would be honest if I didn't say if I've seen something like this at a client site, diagrams which have a lot of moving parts, get a little exaggerated, but custom identity governance systems, they manage user lifecycle, certificate authorities, and HSM devices. All these systems require patching and vulnerability management, and they also need sufficient monitoring and maintenance, and you need the human expertise for all of them, more talent. You also have certificate and credential management across all these systems, which adds further complexity. The more complex these systems are, the more difficult and adequately, and to adequately secure them. And again, all these systems form your end-to-end trust chain that is, that's attractive for a target for, threat actors. I get into one, I can get into many. But how does this happen? A lot of orgs, they want best in class for different point solutions, for identity lifecycle management, MFA, SSO, in their authentication authorization policies, like conditional access. Or maybe they have homegrown systems that are not documented well, and only a few people know how they work and support it. So that brings in complexity. That brings in those blind spots. Next thing we're going to look at is legacy systems. So legacy systems do have a challenge here. They're older. They lack proper access controls that we have today. These modern access controls. A lot of them don't support MFA, which is pretty much, everyone is using now, MFA. They have their own internal account directories, so that's another, thing we have to manage. There's more overhead for that to support, another credential out there. Some of them need interactive logon on these servers for applications to run. So a service account running on an application server will run interactive mode, and that easily can expose to a threat actor. So what's happened with some of these legacy systems? Sometimes an organization that has been found has been compromised. It was determined that an internet-facing on-premise server, which lacked MFA or proper access controls, had been compromised. That server ran a custom piece of software to sync users between multiple business systems. Once the threat actor gained access to that server, they uncovered the credentials for global administrator level service account to their tenant. But you got to remember, sometimes servers that host applications and integrated services are often not held to the same security standard as like a domain controller or what you consider as T0. This decreases your security posture of your entire identity plane. So some recommendations for your complex and legacy systems. Understand your system. It's crucial to understand all systems that form your identity plane and how authentication and authorization flow between them. Understand which systems are responsible for which workloads within your identity trust chain. Treat the entire system as T0. A compromise of a single link within it can lead to a complete compromise. Properly configure systems. Ensure that all your systems are configured in line with best practices and that the collective configuration is enforcing implemented policies as expected. Ensure sufficient logging and data retention. And simplify authentication and authorization. This will help reduce attack surface of identity compromise. With each additional system, you increase the overhead of securing those systems and increase the chance of misconfiguring or compromising of one of them. So simplify, consolidate. That's the main recommendation here at the end. Next, we're going to look at sync service accounts. So in the hybrid identity world, most users and groups are synced from on-premise Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID. This is required to allow users to access cloud resources via the same set of credentials used on premises. However, accounts used to manage Microsoft Entra ID, such as global administrators, have also been synced to Microsoft Entra ID from on-premise. Then staff often use the same credentials to manage both environments. If Active Directory is compromised and the credentials for these accounts are found by a threat actor, this allows them to easily pivot to Entra ID, expanding the scope of the compromise. Privileged service accounts may be overlooked and, again, synced to your Entra ID. Service accounts may not be subject to certain MFA controls, and you will also have some poorly managed credential management of service accounts. A lot of times you'll see these service accounts in scripts, and sometimes they can be clear text with passwords, so that could easily be stolen by a threat actor. And you just want the threat actor sometimes can uncover account credentials, in these clear texts for your on-premise environment. If the threat actor already had a foothold on your on-premise environment, controls such as MFA are often not enforced, as these networks are seen as trusted also. So look out for these sync service accounts, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But kind of wanted to get back to one of those blind spots here. It is a blind spot, and it's kind of like a lot of service accounts can be like what we talked about, like the emotional blind spot, something the person has chosen to ignore, which can manifest itself as destructive. So I've seen this before. Vendor comes in, they say they need domain admin. Someone will say, "Oh, I'll just give the service account domain admins. We'll figure it out later. What's least privilege we need?" And then months later, we've been compromised. They say it started from the service account is used for a joke of the day app. That's a little exaggerated there, but hey, they didn't think that the joke of the day app would have a compromise to it, but they gave it elevated permissions and they chose to ignore it. So, maybe, you need to change your culture sometimes in an organization that, policies need to be enforced and that, they don't trust anyone or anything, any other, zero trust administration there. Don't trust anyone, that needs to be observed. And you could say that was from an IT admin that was now a former employee. So some good practices. I mentioned best practices early on. I like to say good practices sometimes. Best practice, because I think some people can say that means it's going to fix everything. They are best practices, but they're not going to solve everything. But we do have either good or better practices. So yeah, I would strongly recommend that accounts used to administer Entra ID are native to the cloud, cloud accounts, using managed authentication. They're not synced from on-premise AD. This reduces, the scope of compromise if the Active Directory account gets compromised by preventing that threat actor from leveraging the same credentials that they'll use in Entra ID. Any accounts that hold privilege in on-premise Active Directory, such as domain administrators and respective groups, such as domain admins, should be completely excluded from being synced to Microsoft Entra ID. Most Entra IDs, out of the box synchronization setups, what do you do? A lot of times you do next, and submit it. It's going to, sync all your accounts. I would recommend brushing up on some of your sync rules in Azure AD Connect, or now Cloud Sync, Entra ID Cloud Sync. Sync up on those sync rules, or maybe exclude OUs, so not everything is synced. So those service accounts do get disconnected. The credentials for service accounts that interact with Microsoft Entra ID and Active Directory should be stored securely. Make sure you don't have any clear text applications or scripts out there that are easily recoverable by a threat actor. Possibly maybe, on-prem AD, change those service accounts to managed service accounts, which gives you the ability to, they'll set strong passwords, which are randomly generated. The complexity, minimizes the likelihood of, to be compromised by brute force or dictionary attacks, and it does cycle your passwords regularly. So service accounts that require both, privilege to on-prem AD and Entra ID should have, specific technical controls applied to them. This can include conditional access blocking, access from non-approved locations or IP addresses, specific detection rules, and monitoring the alert on anomalous activity with these accounts. So don't exclude your service accounts or some of your privileged accounts. You do need to include them. In general, besides service accounts, any privileged account should not be, again, excluded from Microsoft conditional access policies, regardless of network location. These accounts should always be held to the highest standards of security. Specifically, using privileged identity management, PIM, and phishing resistant credentials. So our last blind spot we're going to look at is federated identity services. With Microsoft, Entra ID, this would be mainly our ADFS. So many orgs use federated identity providers when users authenticate to cloud apps, such as M365. These federated IDPs enable user authentication. While a significant percentage of orgs have now moved to cloud native authentication in Entra ID, these IDP providers, such as ADFS, are still out there. They're still in use. But they do present, an administrative blind spot within organizations because they are hard, complex to configure. There's multiple servers to maintain with many moving parts. You have, ADF servers and app proxy servers, and the app proxy has to be in a DMZ. That's a lot of moving parts to manage. You have to build and maintain app integration. ADFS only has coarse grain access controls. If you don't know what coarse grain access control, it's a method of granting or denying access based on a single factor, such as the user's role. It's relatively inflexible and basically provides an all or nothing access to sensitive data. It ignores other factors that may affect levels of access, such as location or risk. So all or nothing, not like we have today with conditional access. We can be conditional access is fine-grained access controls. And your IDPs connect to multiple identity management solutions. Again, we touched that some of those IDPs could be blind spots because we don't know how they're managing their security. If you are running ADFS, you still are, think about some better practices and recommendations for hardening your security on your ADFS deployment. Think about ensuring only AD admins and ADF admins have admin rights to those systems. Reduce local administrator group memberships. Require all cloud admin, all admins to have multi-factor authentication. Limit access on network via firewalls. All GPOs that apply to ADF servers should only apply to them and not other servers as well. This limits potential privilege escalation through GPO modification. Ensure the installed certificates are protected against theft. Don't store those on a share or network. Make sure your logging is set appropriately. Are you sending it to a SIEM, to maybe Sentinel? Remove unnecessary protocols. And of course, all your service accounts should be complex. So federated providers are high-level targets. These ADF servers, why are they high-level targets? Because federated identities can provide user authentication to cloud apps in your Microsoft Entra ID hybrid environment. Federated providers are T0 identity planes. T0 systems are those that, if compromised, subsequently, the rest of your environment will be compromised also. Federated, identity providers are, a favorite target of threat actors. These threat actors understand that if you can, compromise T0, then they can persist undetected within an environment for extended periods of time and to take control of all identities. So how do threat actors stay undetected? Some of the things they do is credential theft. They might use techniques like phishing, key logging, or brute force attacks to steal legitimate user credentials, someone's everyday account out there. They have credential stuffing, which may use stolen username password combinations, obtained from data breaches from other platforms. Malware, could be installed on endpoints with, within the network that can intercept user credentials before they reach the ADF server. I like living off the land. Attackers, they may abuse legitimate tools and features present on ADF servers or other systems within the network, or to carry out their activities. This includes PowerShell scripts and WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation. Token signing certificate theft. This is what was used a couple of years ago. So the token signing certificate theft, allows threat actors to bypass, MFA and access cloud services as any user at any time. Steal the Active Directory token signing certificate and use it to forge tokens for arbitrary use. This has been described before as Golden SAML, which was that SolarWinds attack. This would allow the attacker to authenticate into a federated resource provider, such as Microsoft 365, as any user, without the need of a user's password or their corresponding MFA mechanism. So bypasses everything if this can get stolen. There is ways to mitigate the risk of ADFS token signing certificate theft. Organizations should implement the following security best practices: security certificate management, regular certificate rotation, access controls, monitoring and alerting, and network segmentation, and user education. So educate users and admins about risks of certificate theft and the importance of protecting those those private keys on those certificates. Promote awareness of phishing attacks, social engineering tactics, and other common techniques used by attackers to gain unauthorized access. So some recommendations for federated systems to make yourself safer in the hybrid environment. Move to native Microsoft Entra ID authentication. You've got easier single sign-on to thousands of apps, including legacy, SaaS, and third-party apps. It improves your organization's security posture. It improves risk management, compliance, and governance capabilities by eliminating on-premise infrastructure, reduces costs for infrastructure, implements a single control plane for identity and access management, and it streamlines the user experience for accessing applications. If you are still using ADFS, yes, you do rely on and trust your partners and have integrated them into your environment to use their IDP, but are they following the same service principles that you do? These IDPs are given access to your applications, but could they be compromised? Align yourself to, don't trust anyone, and make sure MFA and conditional access policies are being used by these third-party IDPs. I mean, if you look at the history of some of the the biggest compromises over the years, they've always started with third-party trusted actors. And then deploy Microsoft Defender agents. Microsoft Defender for identity, which it does help you prevent breaches using proactive identity security assessments. It detects threats using real-time analytics and data intelligence. It investigates suspicious activities using clear, actionable incident information, and it responds to attacks using automatic response to compromised identities. So some final thoughts. We'll just go through some final thoughts here today about what we've reviewed today. How we can take inventory, how we want to inventory, we want to find our blind spots. Once we find our blind spots, we'll be able to roadmap a future state. Within that future state, we probably want to modernize and we probably want to consolidate. So inventorying your identity system, which involves documenting, cataloging all components, configurations, and dependencies related to your organization's identity management across on-premise and cloud environments. It offers several benefits. Visibility, you create an inventory provides you with comprehensive understanding. A lot of people don't understand how everything is working, so this will create visibility. Risk management, with a clear inventory, you can identify potential security risks, vulnerabilities, weaknesses. This allows you to prioritize security measures such as patching, updating, replacing outdated components, and mitigate those risks effectively. Compliance, many regulatory standards and compliance frameworks such as GDPR, HIPAA, PCI, they require organizations to maintain accurate records of their IT systems. Having an inventory helps you demonstrate compliance with these requirements during audits or assessments. So it's always always good to keep your auditors happy by doing compliance. Efficient troubleshooting. Again, if you know what your environment's doing, it's going to be easier to troubleshoot when an issue does occur within your hybrid identity system. Having a detailed inventory, facilitates quicker troubleshooting and resolution. You can easily identify the affected components and their dependencies, streamlining the investigation process. Change management. Manage changes to your identity infrastructure, comes more organized, controlled. You can track modification, updates, or additions to components, ensure that changes are properly documented and tested before implementation. So if you ever do have any type of issue, if you're compromised, you can go back and look at your change management schedule to see maybe that's something that was missed, or when a change did happen, did that expose something? Resource optimization. If you know what your system's doing, you know the talent that's required. So you might find out that not enough is being done on one system. So you need to hire someone to help out with that. Disaster recovery and business continuity, it's always good, because if you know what's going on, again, something does happen, it's easier to get back up and running. And finally, partner management. We talked about it. Those third-party IDPs, it's good to talk to them. It's good to understand what they're doing for their security needs. So you get a better trust, since their trust is going to go through your identity plane. So out of that inventory, you're going to probably find some of the blind spots. It could be some of the things we talked about today. Those are, 3 things I decided to talk about. There could be other blind spots. So, so if you do, at any blind spots in your hybrid system, could bring up some, enhanced security. You might want to have enhanced security. You might want to, get into risk mitigation. By uncovering blind spots, you can assess and mitigate potential risks associated with your hybrid environment. Again, compliance will come up. This will help with prevention of data breaches. Oops, sorry about that. Improve your incident response. It'll enhance your visibility, which we talked about with the inventory. It'll optimize your security investments. It'll maintain trust and your reputation as an organization. There's that brand. Knowing what's going on, fixing that gives you a great brand for your security posture. So you've inventoried, found your blind spots. Let's roadmap. A lot of orgs want a roadmap. It gives you that that strategic planning, a clear vision. It gives you that risk mitigation. Again, resource allocation. Do I need more people working on conditional access policies now, since I've chosen not to use ADFS anymore? So that could come up. Enhanced collaboration. Again, change management. Continuous improvement. That slide we saw with all that complexity that may have been exaggerated, it looked like spaghetti. Maybe it's less, like maybe it's more simpler. That's what we want to get to. We want something simpler and consolidated, which is our next slide. Let's get out of our roadmap. Should give us the ability to modernize and consolidate our complexity. Consolidating, well, involves integrating and streamlining various identity management components across both, on-prem and cloud environments. So simplified management, modern identity solutions offer centralized management interfaces, making it easier to administer, maintain user identities, access control, security policies. Enhanced security, modern identity solutions, incorporate advanced security features such as MFA, conditional access policies, adaptive access policies. Improved user experience, users always want single sign-on. They can get to their, an Entra ID. If you're a big Microsoft user, you have your application, My App, so one place for all your applications. It's all consolidated. Cost savings. If you plan to collapse ADFS or other IDPs or other solutions that are in your hybrid environment, you're going to have cost savings from those servers, managing them, all the different patching. So probably hundreds and hundreds of hours that you took to admin, and that will be a cost saving. And you can utilize the FTEs that you have, or contractors, or anyone that works on that to help you secure in other ways. So scaling and flexibility. Modern solutions are designed to scale and adapt. If you're going to Entra ID, it is scalable. It's the 99.99% up and ready for you all the time. It's easy to add applications as needed. You do have that compliance and governance. ADFS didn't have as much compliance and governance, but maybe moving to Entra ID for authentication and authorization needs, you have that compliance and governance. And the final thing, it is streamlined, but it reduces the risk of errors and misconfigurations. Managing a single identity, will reduce your risk of errors and misconfigurations that occur when dealing with multiple disparate systems. Making changes on 10 different systems in one, you're going to have a lot less errors. And that is it for this webinar. If anyone has any questions. And it was a lot to get through on a webinar, but hopefully everyone got some information about your hybrid identities and everything that is involved with it. I chose to use the theme of blind spots to find those blind spots. Again, you can have a blind spot for different reasons, but inventorying and fixing those blind spots and looking into the future can help your security posture. So this is the end of this webinar. If you do have questions about today's webinar or previous webinars, or any questions about Oxford Computer Group, here's our contact info. Example of sync rules. So what we reviewed with sync rules is you don't want to sync all your service accounts because they could have elevated permissions. You don't want them to go into your Entra tenant. So in Azure AD Connect or Entra ID Connect or Cloud Sync rules is, out of the box will synchronize all your accounts. So if you specify all your OUs, a lot of people have OUs called service accounts. It's going to sync them up there. So updating a sync rule would say either in the wizard can do it. You don't even have to touch a sync rule. The wizard, you can go in there and say only include these OUs. So if you exclude that service accounts OU, it's not going to get synced up to your Entra ID tenant. But an actual sync rule could say that you could put logic in there that says only include accounts that have, actually exclude accounts that might have the description called service account. So if I see an account with the description attribute has service account in it, I'm going to exclude it from my sync. So it's not going to sync up to Entra ID. All right, again, there's our information here. Shoot us a note. And thanks for attending, everyone. Have a good day.